Ms. Bennett, the judge looked directly at me. 13 years of military service does not make your account any more credible than anyone else's in this courtroom. No one said a word. Across the room, Melissa leaned back slightly. The corner of her mouth lifted. I kept both hands on the table. I understand, Your Honor. Harold stood. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Melissa. He simply placed 2 pages in front of the judge. Then, let's set the people aside for a moment and just look at the dates. He turned to the first page, April 11th. Then he placed his finger beside a time. 4:20 p.m. The judge's pen stopped. 3 weeks earlier. April 11th had meant nothing to me. I didn't even know. I would eventually have to prove where my father actually was. At 4:20 that afternoon, 5 days after we buried my father, the doorbell rang. Melissa was standing in the hallway. Beside her was a man in a gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. Claire, this is Gerald Price. He's the attorney helping the family handle the estate. 10 minutes later, Gerald placed a stack of papers on my living room table. This isn't a transfer of ownership. It's just a temporary management agreement. He turned the papers toward me. My father's name, Thomas Bennett, Daniel, Melissa, and me. And in the middle of it all, this was the lake house. If I sign this, Daniel and Melissa get a say in what happens. Gerald nodded. On certain matters. Melissa spoke up. Daniel is the one who stayed here with Dad. He took him to his appointments. He looked after the house. He handled the things that needed someone here in person. She looked at me. He shouldn't have to ask his younger sister for permission every time something needs to be handled. I looked down at the papers. She wasn't completely wrong. Daniel had been here, and I had spent most of the past 13 years serving away from home. Gerald set a pen down, right beside my hand. I didn't want to fight my brother over a house. My fingers touched the pen. Then I noticed a line near the bottom of the page. Pursuant to amendment dated April 11th. I stopped. April 11th. The same date I would see on the judge's table. 3 weeks later. But at that moment, it was just a date on a piece of paper. What is the April 11th amendment? Melissa looked at Gerald. Gerald straightened the papers in front of him. The most recent amendment to your father's estate plan. Let me see it. We'll provide it. Before I sign this? Of course. I looked at the pen again, then I put it down and pushed it back toward Gerald. Melissa looked at me. Claire, do you really want to turn this into a fight? I haven't started a fight. I closed the folder. I just haven't signed anything. After they left, I haven't the apartment went quiet. The pen was still sitting on the table. I called Harold Mercer. He had handled my father's legal paperwork for nearly 20 years. I didn't tell him everything that had happened. I only read him one line. Amendment dated April 11th. The other end of the line went silent. Did you draft it? No. I sat up straighter. Harold continued immediately. That doesn't prove anything is wrong. Thomas could have used another law firm. Then he paused. But Claire, I handled almost every major change to your father's estate. I looked at the pen Gerald had left behind, just minutes earlier. I had almost used it to sign. So what should I do? Don't sign anything until we see the April 11th amendment. I looked at the papers still sitting on the table. One signature. And maybe everything would have ended right there. Or at least, that's what I thought. If you were in my place, would you sign just to keep the peace? Or would you stop? Leave your answer in the comments. Because at that point, I still thought I was only refusing to sign a piece of paper. I had no idea. Melissa would come back the next morning. No lawyer, no more paperwork. She only wanted one thing. The key my father had once placed in my hand, and told me that no matter how far away I went, I should always have a way to come home. The next morning, Harold was already waiting for me in his office. 2 folders sat on the desk. He got straight to the point. I checked twice. The The April 11th Amendment was not drafted by my office, so it isn't valid? Harold shook his head. We can't say that yet. Your father had every right to use another attorney. He opened the older estate file. His finger stopped on one section of the page. But Thomas was very clear about the house. He did not give Daniel full control, and he did not give it to you. Major decisions could not be made by one person alone. My phone buzzed. Melissa. She was standing outside my apartment. 15 minutes later, Melissa sat across from me. This time, there was no Gerald, no folder. She looked straight at me. I need the key to the lake house. What for? Daniel is handling the insurance, repairs, and the property inventory. He needs access. I looked at her. Did Daniel ask you to come get it? Melissa paused. Daniel doesn't need to know every little thing I handle. I said nothing, for the first time. I realized I had assumed Daniel and Melissa were always acting together, but I had never actually asked Daniel. I took the key off my key ring, the old piece of metal, its edges worn smooth. Dad had given it to me years earlier, before one of the times I had to leave home. He placed it in the palm of my hand. No matter where you go, you should always have a way to come home. I set the key on the table. Melissa looked at it, then picked it up. Before she left, she stopped at the door. Daniel was the one who was here when Dad needed someone. Don't turn this into a fight, just because you're not used to being the one who doesn't control everything. The door closed behind her. That afternoon, I drove to the lake house. I stepped onto the porch. Out of habit, my hand went into my pocket. Empty. I stood in front of the door for a few seconds. Through the glass, Dad's chair was still beside the window, on the table. The mug he always used was still there. Behind it stood the filing cabinet, and that was when I remembered the blue box. Dad used it to keep the property tax papers, repair receipts, and letters about the house. I called Daniel. Do you know where Dad's blue file box is? No. Did Melissa take it? A pause. Claire, don't start. I'm not accusing her of anything. I'm asking who had access to Dad's office after he went into the hospital. Daniel let out a breath. Me. Melissa. The caregiver. Maybe Dad himself before that. Okay. I ended the call. I didn't know who had moved the box, and I still didn't know who had prepared the amendment. I only knew there were too many things around Dad during those final weeks that I had never seen. That evening, Harold called. There's a reference to the April 11th Amendment, but there's no copy of it in the records Thomas asked me to keep. So what do we do next? Find out who prepared it. Right then, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. Daniel stood in the hallway, alone. No Melissa. He didn't say a word. He simply lifted what he was holding in both hands. Dad's blue file box. Daniel stood outside my door, said the blue box in both hands. Looking for this? I stared at the box. Where did you find it? In the garage. Melissa said Dad moved it down there before he went into the hospital. Daniel came inside. He set the box on the table, but he didn't leave. I opened it right in front of him. Inside, there was nothing that looked like a secret. Roof repair bills, property tax records, medical appointments, receipts for repairs to the dock. Then, a brown leather notebook. I recognized the handwriting the moment I opened it. Dad! I turned through a few pages. March 18th. Daniel drove me to cardiology. Stayed the whole afternoon. I stopped. The next page. Daniel fixed the dock rail. Wouldn't let me pay him. Daniel looked down at the notebook. Dad wrote that? I nodded. Nothing else needed to be said. Daniel had been here. He had taken care of Dad, and now Dad's own handwriting was reminding me of that. I kept turning the pages. Another line, coffee Daniel bought is terrible. I laughed. Daniel did too. Just a little. Then I turned to the next page. The smiles disappeared. April 11th. Daniel saw the date. The day of the amendment? Yeah. I read the first line. Melissa asked what the lake house was worth. The line below it didn't ask how I was feeling. Daniel said nothing. Neither did I. I just kept reading. Daniel wants everyone to get along. Melissa wants decisions made quickly. Daniel held out his hand. Let me see. I slid the notebook across to him. He read it. Once. Then again. His phone buzzed on the table. Melissa. Daniel looked at the screen, then answered. I'm at Claire's. I just brought over some of Dad's things. He walked toward the window. I couldn't hear what Melissa was saying, but a few seconds later, Daniel turned around. No, Claire isn't accusing you of anything. He ended the call. I looked at him. If you knew about the amendment and still let Melissa bring that agreement to me, Daniel cut me off. You don't know what I knew. I went quiet. Don't turn the fact that I trusted my wife into proof that I was trying to take the house away from you. I had no answer to that. I had asked Harold not to draw conclusions beyond what the records could prove, but with Daniel, I had almost done exactly that. I'm sorry. Daniel didn't answer. He simply pushed the notebook back toward me. I looked down. At the bottom of the April 11th page, there was one more line. R. Keller, documents. I took a picture of the page, sent it to Harold. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Claire, I'm looking at the amendment. I heard papers turning on the other end. The person who notarized the document is... He paused. Rebecca Keller. I looked down at the page in front of me. R. Keller, documents. So Dad met with her. Maybe, Harold answered. But that isn't something we know yet. Then what do we know? The same name appears in two places. A beat. Now we need to reconstruct. April 11th. Daniel stood up. He walked to the door, then stopped. Claire. Yeah? If you find anything... He looked back at Dad's notebook. Call me first. The door closed behind him, on the table. The notebook was still open to the same page. April 11th. And for the first time, it wasn't just a date on the amendment anymore. It was a day we would have to reconstruct hour by hour. The next morning, Harold placed two documents side by side on the table. He didn't explain them right away. He picked up a pen and circled one time on the first page. 4:20 p.m. This is when the amendment says your father signed in front of Rebecca Keller. Then he slid the second page toward me. Dad's appointment record. I looked at the two times. How far apart are the two places? Far enough that we need to ask the question. So Dad couldn't have signed at 4:20? Harold shook his head. We can't say that yet. He could have left the appointment early. One of the records could be inaccurate, or there may be an explanation we don't know yet. He placed the two pages closer together. But right now, they don't line up on their own. Harold pulled out one more page. The review of the amendment's electronic file. He glanced at it, then set it underneath the other two. This just gives us one more reason to check the timeline. It doesn't prove forgery, and it doesn't tell us who did what. Then I looked at him. So what matters most? Harold picked up the pen. He circled the same spot again. 4:20 p.m. This. He looked up. Where was Thomas Bennett at 4:20 p.m. on April 11th? That afternoon, Daniel met me at a small coffee shop. I didn't bring the metadata. I didn't bring the whole file, just two pages, the amendment and the appointment record. I placed them side by side. Daniel looked at the time. Dad could have left early. He could have. The record could be wrong too. That's possible. He looked at me. So what are you trying to prove? Nothing yet. I pointed to the amendment. I want to know who took Dad to see Rebecca Keller. Daniel was quiet. Then he said, I asked Melissa last night. I waited. She said she didn't take Dad. A beat. Daniel looked down at the table. Actually, she said she didn't see Dad at all that day. I took out my phone. I opened the photo of Dad's notebook and set it in front of him. April 11th. Melissa asked what the lake house was worth. Daniel enlarged the photo. He read it again. Dad could have written down the wrong date. He could have. Melissa could be remembering it wrong too. That's possible. He looked up. You keep saying it's possible because I don't know which version is right, I said. But I do know. These two versions are not the same. Daniel's phone buzzed. Melissa. He looked at the screen. He didn't answer. His finger touched the mute button. Then he turned the phone face down on the table. Claire. Yeah? If Dad really did meet Keller. Daniel looked down at the time. 4:20 p.m. Who took him there? I didn't answer. Daniel pulled the amendment toward him. Send me a copy. What for? I'm going to ask Melissa again. That evening, Harold called. Melissa's side has responded to our request for the records. I looked at the copy on my table. The circle was still around, 4:20. How did they explain it? Harold was quiet. They didn't explain April 11th. Then what did they talk about? You. I sat up straighter. They're talking about the years you were away. The military. The fact that Daniel was the one caring for Thomas. And the fact that you came back just as the estate was being settled. I looked at the 2 pages in front of me. On one side, the amendment. On the other, the appointment record. Between them, there was only one question. Where was Thomas Bennett at 4:20 p.m.? But Melissa's side wasn't answering that question. Instead, they were preparing to bring a different question into the courtroom. What kind of person was Claire Bennett? The next morning, to Harold. Harold called me into his office. When I walked in, there were no new folders on the desk, only his phone. Harold looked at me. I found a voicemail from Thomas. Your father called to confirm an appointment. But at the end of the message, he added a few things. What day? 3 days before the amendment. Harold pressed play. Dad's voice filled the room. He sounded tired, but it was still the voice I had known my entire life. Harold, if there are any changes involving the house, make sure Claire is told first. There was a pause in the recording. Then Dad said, Daniel just wants everyone to get along. I don't want him caught in the middle of this. The message ended. The phone screen went dark. I kept staring at it. For days, I had been telling Harold not to draw conclusions beyond what the records could prove. But with Daniel, I hadn't followed that rule myself. I saw him standing beside Melissa and assumed he knew everything she was doing. Dad hadn't seen him that way. I want Daniel to hear this. An hour later, Daniel sat in the same chair I had been sitting in. Harold played the voicemail again. This time, I didn't watch the phone. I watched my brother. When Dad said, I don't want him caught in the middle, Daniel lowered his eyes. The recording stopped. When did Dad say this? 3 days before the amendment. Harold answered. Daniel was quiet. Then he said, Melissa told me Dad wanted everything handled quickly. I looked at him. You believe her? Daniel looked up. She's my wife. His phone buzzed on the table. Melissa. Daniel looked at the screen. He didn't answer. He didn't silence it. He simply turned the phone face down. It kept buzzing for a few more seconds, then stopped. Harold took a set of papers from his desk drawer. Melissa's side filed a response. He placed it in front of me. I read it. There was no clear answer about who had taken Dad to Rebecca Keller. No explanation for the conflict around 4:20. Instead, there was my name. 13 years of military service. The years I had lived away from home. The fact that Daniel had stayed behind to care for Dad. And the timing of my return. Just as the estate was being settled, they're saying I came back for the house? They're challenging your credibility, Harold said. I set the papers down. But we're not asking them to believe me. Harold looked at me. Exactly. We're asking them to explain the records. He slid another page toward me. They've also offered to settle before the hearing. If you stop challenging the amendment, you keep your access to the house. I looked at the bottom of the page. The amendment stays in place. I pushed the page back. Then no. That afternoon, the court scheduled a hearing. Daniel stood by the window while I read the notice. Claire, Melissa is going to say you only showed up after Dad died. I know. She'll say I was the one who stayed. I know that too. Daniel looked at me. I folded the notice. They can argue about me, but April 11th is still April 11th. Daniel's phone was still face down on the table. He still hadn't called Melissa back. A few days later, I walked into the courtroom wearing my service dress uniform, and before anyone asked where my father had really been at 4:20 p.m. on April 11th, Melissa's side decided to put me on trial first. A few days later, I sat across from Melissa in a small county courtroom. Daniel sat beside her. I was wearing my service dress uniform, not because of the hearing. Right afterward, I had an official obligation at the base. Melissa's attorney stood. He looked toward me. Your Honor, Claire Bennett has lived away from her family for many years. Daniel Bennett, on the other hand, was regularly there with their father. He paused. His eyes moved over my uniform. Ms. Bennett's decision to appear today in uniform should not give her account any greater weight. The judge looked at me. Ms. Bennett, 13 years in the military does not make your account any more credible than anyone else's in this courtroom. No one said a word. Melissa leaned back slightly. The corner of her mouth lifted just a little. I kept both hands on the table. Understood, Your Honor. Harold stood. He didn't look at Melissa. He didn't look at me. He simply placed a file in front of the judge. Then, let's leave character out of this and look only at the dates. He opened to the first page, April 11th, 4:20 p.m. This is when the amendment says Thomas Bennett signed in front of Rebecca Keller. He set down the second page. This record places Mr. Bennett at another location during the same time period. Melissa's attorney stood. Mr. Bennett could have left the appointment early. Harold nodded. That's possible. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a third page on the table. And if that were the only issue, that explanation might be enough. A beat. But there is also the electronic file. The judge looked down. He already had the analysis in front of him. Harold didn't explain it again. He only said, the timing of the file processing also needs to be explained. The judge read one line, then the next. The pen in his hand stopped. He went back to the amendment. April 11th, then the appointment record. 4:20 p.m., then the file analysis. Melissa was no longer leaning back. The judge looked up, straight across the courtroom. Counsel? Melissa's attorney opened his file, turned one page, then another. Your Honor, we need to verify the timeline. I looked at Daniel. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Melissa. Melissa kept her eyes forward. The smile was gone. The judge looked at her attorney. You are asking this court to rely on this amendment to change management authority? Yes, Your Honor. But at this point, you cannot explain the timeline of the very document you are asking the court to rely on. Melissa's attorney paused. We need to verify it further. The judge set down his pen. Harold stood. We are not asking the court to find that the amendment is fraudulent. We are simply asking the party relying on it to explain how it was executed. Melissa's attorney requested a recess. The judge granted it. 20 minutes later, we returned. Melissa sat down first. Daniel took the seat beside her, but this time, neither of them said a word. Harold stood. Your Honor, before we continue, there is one more issue. The judge looked at him. What issue? Harold placed a thin folder on the table. Disclosure. Melissa's attorney looked up. Melissa turned toward him. So did Daniel. The judge opened the folder. The first page, then the second. No one spoke. The pen the judge had just picked up stopped again halfway across the page. He read it once more, then looked up. Counsel. A pause. When did your office become aware of this? Melissa's attorney did not answer right away. Melissa looked at him. Daniel looked at him too. And I still had no idea what Harold had just put in front of the judge. But I could see one thing clearly. From that moment on, no one in that courtroom was looking at my uniform anymore. The judge kept his eyes on Melissa's attorney. When did your office become aware of this? The attorney stood. Your Honor, we need to review the file. The judge's tone did not change. That wasn't my question. Harold stood. He opened the folder. Rebecca Keller, the notary who witnessed the April 11th amendment, had previously been hired directly by Melissa to handle paperwork involving that same lake house. I looked at Melissa. She didn't turn around. Harold continued. We are not saying that relationship automatically invalidates the amendment, and we are not accusing Rebecca Keller of doing anything illegal. He placed a document on the table. But the relationship existed. It was directly relevant. And it was not fully disclosed when the amendment was used to support the request for management authority over the house. The judge looked across the courtroom. Are you disputing that this relationship existed? No, Your Honor. Then why wasn't it disclosed? There was no immediate answer. Finally, Melissa's attorney said, we need time to determine that. The judge closed the folder. The request for management authority would not be decided that day. All records related to the amendment were to be preserved. Then independent document expert would review how the amendment was executed, the notary record, and the history of the electronic file. No one was found guilty of anything. No one was arrested, but the April 11th amendment was no longer being treated as something the court could simply accept at face value. After the recess, I returned to the courtroom. Melissa was already in her seat. The chair beside her was empty. The door at the back opened. Daniel walked in. He came down the center aisle. Melissa looked at him. Daniel reached her row. But he didn't stop. He walked past her. A few more steps, then sat down. Directly behind me. I didn't turn around. After the hearing, Daniel called to me in the hallway. Claire. I stopped. He was holding a bundle of old letters. I found these in Dad's papers. You'd seen them before? Daniel nodded. Melissa said to let the lawyers handle them with the rest of the estate. A pause. I listened to her. He handed the letters to me. I shouldn't have done that. Harold opened them. They were letters between Dad and Harold's office, written before April 11th. In one of them, Dad had asked that any major changes involving the house be independently reviewed before they were carried out. It wasn't proof that the amendment was fraudulent. It didn't automatically invalidate any document, but it showed that Dad had wanted an extra layer of review, one the current record still could not explain. Daniel looked at me. I trusted Melissa. She's my wife. I said nothing. He lowered his eyes. But I still could have asked. I took the letters. I didn't tell him everything was okay, because it wasn't. Over the next 3 weeks, the independent expert reviewed everything piece by piece. The amendment, the notary record, April 11th, the electronic file history, was no single smoking gun, just records, placed side by side. 3 weeks later, we returned to the courtroom. Melissa sat across from me. The chair beside her was still empty. 3 weeks later, we returned to the courtroom. Melissa sat across from me. The chair beside her was still empty. The independent expert's report was in front of the judge. He read through several pages, then looked up. The review did not say that every suspicion I had was correct, but it confirmed 3 things. The timeline for April 11th. Gobe could not be clearly explained by the records currently available. The prior connection between Melissa and Rebecca Keller should have been fully disclosed, and the history of the electronic file did not resolve the remaining questions about how the amendment had been executed. The judge set the report down. There is not enough evidence for this court to conclude that every one of these issues resulted from intentional conduct. Melissa kept her eyes straight ahead. But this court also cannot rely on the April 11th amendment. He paused. To expand or transfer management authority over this estate. I didn't move. The judge continued. The request for management authority based on that amendment is denied. No one applauded. There was no bang of a gavel. Harold simply closed the file in front of him. Melissa remained still. Daniel sat behind me. And with that, the part of this fight that had to happen in a courtroom was over. I had just started down the courthouse steps when I heard Daniel behind me. Claire! I turned around. He stood a few steps away. No files, no lawyer. Just a key. I recognized it immediately. The key to the lake house. Daniel looked down at it. Dad gave this to you. I know. I knew about the key, he said. I didn't know the rest. I looked at him. You could have asked. Daniel was quiet. Then he nodded. I know. He walked over to a nearby stone bench, set the key down. He didn't try to put it in my hand. He didn't say anything else. Then he walked away. I stayed where I was. The key rested on the stone, catching a thin line of light. I didn't pick it up right away. That afternoon, I drove to the lake house. I stepped onto the porch. This time, when my hand went into my pocket, the key was there. I slipped it into the lock, turned it. Click! The door opened. Dad's chair was still beside the window. The late afternoon light stretched across the floor. I stood in the doorway and remembered what he used to say. No matter where you go, you should always have a way to come home. I used to think Dad had left behind a trap, hidden inside all those papers. But he hadn't. He had simply left enough of a record behind so that when the people still living began telling different versions of the story, the truth would still have somewhere to stand. Daniel and I never went back to the way things were. Maybe we never will, but we started talking again. Not through lawyers, not through Melissa, just as brother and sister. As for the key, I still have it, not because the house belongs to me, but because I finally understood why Dad gave it to me, so that no matter how far away I went, I would always know the way home. If you were Claire, would you ever give Daniel a key of his own one day? Or are there some things we can forgive, but never truly return from? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next story.